woman meets angels after death. What they told her will stun you, NDE. Emma couldn't remember the exact moment she died. She only knew that it had happened. 1 minute she had been on the ground, her body lifeless from the car accident, and the next she was somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't here. The pain, the overwhelming pain she had felt as the vehicle crashed into her, the sharp burning in her chest, had vanished, replaced by an eerie, suffocating calmness. It was a feeling she couldn't quite describe, as if the world around her had stopped moving altogether. Her limbs didn't ache. She didn't feel the thrum of her heartbeat or the rush of her breath. In fact, she didn't feel anything at all. There was only an overwhelming stillness. And then she heard it. Emma. The voice was familiar, but she couldn't place it. It felt like it had come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, a soft whisper in the air that seemed to fill her entire consciousness. Emma, you are not alone. The words were comforting but also frightening, sending a shiver down her spine. She tried to open her eyes, but there was no physical body to move, no sensation of eyes or eyelids. Yet somehow, she knew she was aware of her surroundings. It was like she had existed beyond her body, beyond the physical limitations of her senses. The voice came again, this time more clearly, with a sense of purpose. Do not be afraid. This is only the beginning. Suddenly, a brilliant light appeared before her. It was neither hot nor cold, but felt like it was filling every inch of her being. She couldn't see through it, yet she didn't need to. It was a presence, overwhelming but not painful, gentle but powerful. The light was not blinding. No, it was welcoming, as if it was pulling her toward it, guiding her. And then she was there. The landscape was nothing like she had ever seen before. There were no trees, no sky, no earthly landmarks. All around her stretched an expanse of pure, vibrant light, an endless sea of brilliance. Emma couldn't see the edges, the end, or even the beginning of this place. It felt like the space itself was infinite. Where am I? Emma thought, or perhaps whispered aloud, though she wasn't sure how her thoughts were forming in this place. As if on cue, a figure stepped forward out of the light. It was a man, though the details of his appearance were blurry, like seeing something through fog. His face was serene, his posture calm. The figure exuded an aura of peace, yet there was an underlying power to him that made Emma's chest tighten, a recognition she couldn't fully understand. Who are you? She asked. Although her voice didn't sound the way it should have, there was no sound, only the echo of her thoughts. The man smiled, and it was as if the light itself brightened in response to the warmth of his expression. I am a guide. I am here to show you what you need to see. Emma blinked, or at least she thought she did. See what? Her mind was still reeling from the events that had just unfolded. The crash, her body, and now this overwhelming new reality she found herself in. It all seemed so unreal, so dreamlike, that part of her still couldn't fully accept it. The figure in front of her stepped closer, his presence now overwhelming, yet somehow reassuring. The truth of your existence, of why you are here, and of what happens when you leave the physical world. Emma felt a stirring within her, something deep in her soul, as though she already knew the answers. But it didn't make sense. Was she truly dead? Was this heaven, or was it something else? And more importantly, if this was the afterlife, what was the truth that this man was talking about? Before she could speak again, the figure lifted his hand, and the light around them shifted. The scene around Emma began to change, slowly at first, then all at once, until she was standing in a vast, open field. The sky was a deep blue, but there were no clouds. It was as if the world itself was breathing, alive in a way she couldn't understand. And then she saw them. People, figures, really, walking toward her, each one glowing with an ethereal light, just like the figure in front of her. They weren't speaking. There were no words between them, but Emma could feel their presence. It was as though they were trying to communicate with her, not with their mouths, but through their very being. What is this? She asked again, though the question felt like a whisper in the vastness of this strange place. This is a vision, the figure replied. A vision of what is to come. A vision of what awaits you. Emma felt her heart race as the realization hit her. This wasn't just a dream or a fleeting thought. She was experiencing something far more profound, something that no human was ever meant to experience until the moment they died. And it wasn't just a peaceful scene. Something darker lurked in the background, something she could feel but couldn't quite name. One of the figures stepped forward, and Emma's breath caught. This figure was different. There was no light emanating from them. Instead, there was an unnatural darkness, a void that seemed to consume everything around them. The figure wore a hooded cloak, their face hidden in shadow, but Emma could feel their eyes on her. The energy they emitted was unsettling, the opposite of the calm serenity she had felt earlier. "Who are they?" Emma whispered, unable to tear her eyes away from the dark figure. "They are the ones who will test you," the guide replied softly. "They are the ones who must be faced, understood, and ultimately, defeated." The words hung in the air, suffocating Emma with their weight. Something inside of her told her that this wasn't just a vision of what was happening now. This was a glimpse of what was yet to come. The battle between light and darkness was beginning, and Emma was standing at the center of it all. "Test me?" Emma's voice trembled. "Why me?" The figure's answer was simple but chilling. "Because you are not yet ready to rest." And just like that, the world around her began to twist and warp, the colors fading into darkness, the peacefulness turning into something far more sinister. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She realized with sudden clarity that her journey in the afterlife was just beginning. Emma stood frozen, her heart racing as the dark figure in front of her seemed to pull all the light from the space around them. The air felt heavy, thick with an unnatural stillness, as though everything was holding its breath. She couldn't look away, no matter how hard she tried. The figure, cloaked in shadow, stood tall and still, the darkness around them pulsating like a living entity. There was no sound, no movement, just an overwhelming presence that made Emma's stomach churn. Her guide, the man who had greeted her with warmth, had stepped back, leaving her alone to face this figure. She could feel his presence behind her, but the weight of the moment felt like it was hers to bear alone. She didn't know what was expected of her, but she could feel the tension building in the air. Something was about to happen, and she wasn't sure she was ready. "Who are you?" Emma asked, her voice trembling as she forced herself to take a step forward. Her legs felt unsteady, as if the ground beneath her might shift at any moment. But she had to ask. She had to understand. The figure in the shadows didn't answer immediately. Instead, they slowly raised their head, revealing a face that was both human and something else entirely. It was like a mask, hollow and blank, yet somehow familiar. Emma's pulse quickened as her mind raced, trying to make sense of the sensation she felt. A deep, primal fear, as though this entity was not a stranger, but something tied to her own soul. "Why do you fear me?" the figure's voice asked, smooth and cold. It echoed in her mind, resonating in a way that felt like a warning. "What you have seen is only a fragment. The truth is far more terrible." Emma's throat went dry. She didn't understand. What truth? What was happening? She had been told she wasn't ready to rest, but now she felt like she was drowning in questions with no answers. Her thoughts swirled in confusion, but she tried to hold on to her composure. The guide, still standing off to the side, silent and watchful, hadn't spoken. The more she tried to focus on the figure, the less she could understand. Its features shifted in her vision, as though they were not meant to be seen clearly, but merely felt. It was as though the very air around it was being manipulated, bending to its will. "Emma," the dark figure continued, its voice taking on a deeper, more resonant tone. "You are the one who must face what others have ignored. You are the one who will witness the fall of humanity." Her heart stopped. A wave of dread washed over her, filling every part of her body. "What do you mean?" she whispered, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. The idea of witnessing the fall of humanity, it was incomprehensible. Her mind couldn't hold onto the weight of such a statement. "You've already seen it," the figure said. "What you saw in the light. The peace. The light was only a veil, Emma. Behind it lies the truth you must come to understand. A truth that has been hidden from all who are too afraid to see." Emma's legs buckled and she dropped to her knees. The overwhelming weight of the figure's words pressed down on her. She couldn't breathe. How could she possibly understand such a vast and terrifying truth? She had barely understood the existence of life beyond death. Now she was being told that she had been chosen to witness something far more profound, something far darker. The figure took a step closer, and Emma instinctively recoiled, but there was nowhere to retreat. The light that had once felt so inviting had dimmed, replaced by this dark, suffocating presence. The truth is in the hearts of mankind, the figure continued. Humanity has abandoned its path. It is no longer worthy of salvation. You will see the end, Emma. You will see it because you are the one who must remember it. What does that mean? Emma begged, her voice desperate. She needed clarity, something that could make sense of the storm inside her. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, her hands shaking. Why me? Why was I chosen? The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, it raised a hand, and Emma's surroundings began to shift again. The once calm and peaceful world around her began to fracture, like shattered glass. Pieces of reality broke off and fell away, revealing glimpses of a world in chaos, destruction, suffering, and a loss of humanity's soul. Images flashed before her eyes, cities burning, people screaming, entire landscapes torn apart by storms and flames. The world, as she had known it, was no longer recognizable. It was as though the very essence of humanity was being consumed by its own mistakes. No, Emma gasped, the horror of what she was seeing gripping her heart. This can't be real. The figure spoke again, its voice cold and unwavering. It is real. It will be real. This is the end you have brought upon yourselves. But you, Emma, you are the key to stopping it. You must return. You must carry this warning. Emma felt the ground beneath her feet crack open, a chasm forming at her feet. The world seemed to be unraveling around her, the images growing more intense, more visceral. She could feel the pull of the darkness, the weight of the truth pressing against her. This was the future she had been shown, a vision of the destruction that was inevitable if things didn't change. The figure reached out to her, its hand now mere inches from her face. The darkness around it seemed to draw her in, suffocating her with the weight of its message. You will return to the world, Emma. But remember this, no one will listen. They never do. You will be alone in this. The truth will be yours to carry, and it will be a heavy burden. But you must warn them. You must show them the path they've lost. The last of Emma's strength seemed to drain away as the figure's hand touched her cheek. There was no escape from what she had seen, no undoing the vision of humanity's downfall. The truth had been laid bare before her, and it was a truth too horrible to ignore. The weight of it crushed her, but the figure's words still echoed in her mind, a final command she couldn't escape. You are the messenger now. You must return to warn them. Suddenly, the world around her began to fade, the darkness pulling away as her vision blurred. The last thing she saw was the figure, its presence looming, as it whispered the final words she would hear before being thrust back into the world of the living. Emma's eyes shot open, and she gasped for air, the sudden rush of oxygen filling her lungs like a jolt of electricity. The sterile smell of the hospital room flooded her senses, and she could hear the beeping of the heart monitor beside her. The coldness of the sheets beneath her made her shiver, and for a moment, she thought she was still in that place, trapped in that dark vision of the future. But she wasn't. She was back, alive. Yet, despite the reality of her surroundings, something was terribly wrong. The weight of what she had seen lingered heavily on her chest, suffocating her with its intensity. She looked around, trying to steady her racing heart, but the memories of the afterlife, the visions of destruction, the figure who had warned her, the chilling message, clung to her mind like a dark cloud. She wasn't sure how much time had passed since the accident, since the moment when her body had gone cold and her heart had stopped beating. But now, lying here in the hospital, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. Nothing felt the same. The door creaked open, and Sarah, her best friend, entered the room with a hesitant smile. Her face was pale, her eyes red from what Emma assumed had been hours of worry and fear. The smile she gave Emma was weak, but Emma could see the relief written on her face. "You're awake," Sarah whispered, rushing to her side. Her hand touched Emma's arm, her fingers trembling slightly. We thought we'd lost you." Emma tried to speak, but her throat felt raw, like it hadn't been used in days. "What happened?" she managed to croak, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes still filled with a mix of confusion and disbelief. "You were in the accident. They said your heart stopped. But you're here. You're alive?" Emma nodded slowly, her mind reeling with the shock of everything that had transpired. She had been dead, truly dead. She had seen it, felt it, but now here she was, breathing alive. It was almost too much to comprehend. But the words from the figure in her vision echoed in her mind. "You will return. You must warn them." "Sarah," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw something. Something terrible." Sarah frowned, her expression full of concern. "Emma, you've been through a lot. The doctors said the trauma from the accident might have affected your memory. Maybe you're still confused about what happened." But Emma shook her head, her eyes wide with the weight of the truth she had seen. "No, Sarah. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't imagining it. I saw the future, the destruction, the chaos, the pain. I saw humanity's end. And it's coming." Sarah recoiled slightly, as though the words themselves were too heavy to grasp. "What are you talking about? You're scaring me." "I'm not kidding." Emma's voice grew more frantic, her breath coming in shallow bursts. "You have to believe me. I saw it. The world is heading towards something terrible. And it's already started." Sarah stood up, her eyes now darting around the room as if searching for a way to make sense of what Emma was saying. "You're still in shock. You've been through something none of us can understand. But this isn't you, Emma. You're not making sense." Emma's heart sank. She knew Sarah didn't understand. How could she? How could anyone? No one could possibly comprehend what Emma had seen, what she had witnessed with her own eyes. The visions, the devastation, the suffering. It wasn't just a random dream or a figment of her imagination. It had been a warning she had to act on, but how could she convince anyone when they didn't even believe her? "I'm telling you, Sarah," Emma said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "This isn't just some hallucination. This is real. I was shown the truth. And if we don't do something, if no one does anything, it'll be too late." Sarah's eyes softened with concern, but there was still a hesitance in her gaze. She didn't know how to process what Emma was saying. She didn't know what to do with it. "Look, maybe you're right," Sarah said quietly, sitting back down beside her. "Maybe what you saw felt real. But you're not in the same place anymore. You're here, in the world we know, and we can't change everything. We can't stop what's out of our control." Emma shook her head again. "That's the problem. We can change it, but no one knows what's coming. People are going to die. Cities will burn. The world as we know it will crumble, and everyone will just stand by and watch it happen." Sarah reached out and took Emma's hand, squeezing it gently. "I want to believe you, I do. But how do you expect anyone to listen to this? You're saying that you saw the end of the world. No one will take that seriously." Emma pulled her hand away, frustration bubbling to the surface. "You have to believe me. I don't know how else to make you understand. I was shown the future, and I don't know what to do with it, but I can't just stay silent." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she stood, pacing in the room, clearly unsure how to process the whirlwind of emotions that Emma's words had stirred. "I don't know how to help you, Emma. I don't know what to do with all of this. It's too much." Emma's chest tightened with desperation. "Then we find someone who will listen. Someone who has the power to do something about it. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. We don't have time." Sarah stopped pacing, looking at her friend for a long moment. She could see the urgency in Emma's eyes, the fear that she wasn't making up some strange fantasy. But Sarah didn't know what to believe. She didn't know how to make sense of any of this. "I need to make them listen," Emma whispered, almost to herself. "I have to." The room felt smaller as Emma's frustration grew. Every breath she took was weighted, every thought a tight knot in her chest. The familiar scent of the sterile hospital air, the beeping of the machines, and the distant hum of voices from the hallway, none of it felt real anymore. It all seemed so far away, as if Emma wasn't truly part of this world anymore. She felt like she was tethered to something far more urgent, something that transcended this place. Her mind, still reeling from her experience in the afterlife, kept flashing back to the vision of the future, to the warning she had received. "Who will listen?" she whispered to herself. "How can I make them believe me?" Sarah was still standing by the window, her back turned to Emma. She was silent, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, as if trying to hold onto something solid amidst the chaos. Emma watched her, trying to find a way to reach her, to make her understand. She knew that Sarah was scared, that this was too much to process all at once. But Emma couldn't stop now. She couldn't wait for someone else to act. She had seen the end, and she was the only one who could stop it. "We need to find someone, Sarah," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to get to the people who can make a difference. I can't carry this alone. It's too much for me. But maybe together we can warn them. The ones who can change the course of things." Sarah turned slowly, her face pale but her eyes filled with something like reluctant understanding. "Who, Emma? Who can we go to? What do you expect them to do? How do we even begin to explain this?" Emma's heart pounded. She could see the hesitation in Sarah's eyes, the doubt, and yet, there was something else there. A flicker of belief, something that hadn't been there before. Emma was certain of it. "I don't know who, but I know we have to start somewhere. It's our only chance." Emma's voice cracked with emotion. "They'll think I'm crazy. They'll think I'm delusional. But I know what I saw, Sarah. I know what's coming. And if we don't stop it, we'll all be lost." Sarah's expression softened, but she didn't speak for a moment. She seemed to be weighing something in her mind. Emma watched her closely, hoping, praying that her words had started to make an impact. She couldn't wait any longer. She couldn't keep the weight of this prophecy to herself. There was no more time to question what she had seen. "I can't let the world end," Emma said quietly, her hands gripping the hospital sheets. "I can't let them suffer because I didn't do anything. I was shown the truth, and I have to do something with it. I can't stand by." Sarah approached the bed, her face contorted with concern. "Emma, you need to take a breath. You're overwhelming yourself. We need time to process everything. We need time to figure out what's really going on here. You were in an accident. Maybe the trauma is affecting you. Maybe this is just your mind trying to make sense of everything." Emma shook her head vehemently. "No, it's not my mind, Sarah. I saw it. I saw the darkness, the destruction, the suffering. I saw people dying, cities burning, everything falling apart. And I'm the one who has to warn them. I can't sit here and do nothing." Sarah bit her lip, her eyes welling with tears. "I don't want to lose you, Emma. I don't want you to spiral into something that isn't real. Please, listen to me. You're not alone in this. But you need to rest, okay? Please, just rest." The desperation in Sarah's voice cut through Emma's resolve. She could hear the love, the concern in Sarah's words, and it made her want to collapse into her arms and forget everything. But she couldn't. Emma knew the truth, and the truth was more terrifying than anything else. "Rest won't save us," Emma said, her voice cold, but the intensity behind it stronger than ever. "The world needs to hear this before it's too late. I've seen it. I can't unsee it. I can't pretend everything is going to be okay. It's not." Tears began to fall down Sarah's face as she took a step back, her arms hugging herself as if to keep herself together. "I wish I could just make this go away, Emma. I wish I could take away the fear, the pain you're feeling. But I don't know how to help you with this. I don't know how to stop what's in your head. I just need you to understand. This isn't something you can control on your own." Emma felt the tears rising in her own eyes, but she pushed them down. She had to be strong. She had to keep moving forward, no matter how heavy the burden. Sarah didn't know what she had seen. She didn't understand. Emma couldn't expect her to. But there had to be someone who could help. Someone who could make the world listen. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "But I have to try. I can't live with this knowledge, knowing what's coming, and do nothing." Sarah's eyes searched Emma's face, trying to find a glimpse of the girl she had once known, but the look in Emma's eyes was different now. There was no longer any trace of doubt, no trace of uncertainty. She was sure, resolute. "I'm not giving up," Emma said quietly but firmly. "I'll make them listen, even if I have to do it alone." And with those words, Emma knew her decision was made. There was no turning back. No more fear. No more doubt. The truth was a heavy burden, but it was hers to carry. She had seen the end, and now she had to make others see it too. The weight of Emma's decision hung in the air like an oppressive storm cloud, dark and heavy. Each breath she took felt harder, as though the very air around her was thick with the burden of knowledge she carried. She had no choice but to act. The visions, the warnings, the future she had glimpsed, there was no way she could live with herself if she didn't at least try. The truth had been laid out before her, and it was terrifying. Yet she knew that the world had to know. If it didn't, if no one listened, the future she had seen would unfold just as she had witnessed. But how could she make them believe her? How could she convince anyone that what she had seen was not some wild dream or a product of the trauma? They would call her crazy. They would dismiss her, just like they had dismissed all the others who had claimed to have seen things beyond this world. But Emma couldn't ignore the urgency in her heart. She couldn't ignore the whispers of destiny that told her she was the one who had to speak out. She spent the next few days in a haze, moving through life like a ghost. The hospital room that had once felt like a refuge now seemed like a prison. It was a cage that held her to a world she no longer understood. She felt so distant from everything around her. The doctors, the nurses, even Sarah. Everyone was concerned about her well-being, her physical recovery, but no one seemed to understand the urgency in her soul. No one could hear the call that was reverberating through every part of her being. The end was coming and she had to stop it. When Sarah came to visit her again, she found Emma sitting by the window, staring out at the world as though it were a distant dream. The sun was setting, casting a soft, golden light across the sky, but Emma couldn't see the beauty in it anymore. All she could see was the vision of destruction, the devastation that awaited them. "Emma," Sarah said gently, stepping into the room. "You've been in here all day. You need to eat something. You haven't been taking care of yourself." Emma didn't turn to look at her. She couldn't. Her mind was too far away, lost in the images of the future that she couldn't erase. The world was unraveling, and it was all she could think about. "I don't care about food, Sarah," Emma said, her voice cold, though she didn't mean to sound so harsh. She just couldn't focus on anything else. "I don't care about anything but making them listen." "Who?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with concern. "Who are you talking about?" "Emma, this is getting out of hand. You've been obsessing over this. You need to stop." Emma turned to look at her, her eyes wide with desperation. "I can't stop. You don't understand. No one does. I've seen it. I've seen what happens if we don't stop it. It's going to happen and we're all going to die. We're all going to be swallowed up by the chaos, and no one will even see it coming. But I know what needs to be done." "Emma," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "You're not well. You need help. You're not making sense." Emma felt her chest tighten. She couldn't blame Sarah for not understanding. How could anyone? She was the only one who had seen it, the only one who had witnessed the end of it all. And now, she was the only one who could stop it. She had to be. "I have to do something, Sarah," Emma said quietly, her voice filled with a fierce determination. "I can't just sit here. I have to warn them. I have to make them see. I have to make the world listen." Sarah looked at her with a mix of fear and pity, and Emma could see the hesitation in her eyes. "I don't know how you expect to make anyone believe you. People are going to think you're crazy, Emma. They'll think you're delusional, just like they've done with all the others who've claimed to have seen the end of the world. They'll lock you away." Emma's throat tightened at the thought. She could see it now, being locked away, dismissed, ignored, just like everyone else who had tried to warn the world of impending disaster. But she couldn't let that happen. She couldn't be silenced. Not when she had seen the truth with her own eyes. "I won't let them lock me away, Sarah," Emma said with a fierce resolve. "I'll find a way. I'll make them listen. I don't care if they think I'm crazy. I don't care if they call me delusional. I've seen what's coming and I have to stop it." Sarah stepped closer to her, her face a mask of concern. "Please, Emma, please listen to me. You're not well. You're not thinking clearly." "I am thinking clearly," Emma shot back, her voice shaking with emotion. "I know what I've seen. I know what's coming. And if I don't do something about it, then we're all doomed. The room fell silent for a moment as Sarah stared at her, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and helplessness. Emma could see the battle waging in Sarah's mind, the desire to help her friend, to support her, but also the overwhelming fear that Emma was slipping further and further away from reality. I don't know what to do, Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to help you. Emma felt the tears rising in her throat, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't let herself break. Not now. Not when she had a purpose. You can help me, Sarah, Emma said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. By believing me. By helping me get the message out. I can't do this alone. I need you. Sarah looked at her, torn between her love for her friend and the overwhelming fear that this was all beyond anything she could understand. But in the end, she nodded. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Emma wasn't alone anymore. She had someone who believed her, someone who would stand with her as she fought to stop the impending destruction. I'll help you, Sarah said quietly, but we need to be careful. We need to find a way to reach the right people. We can't just go around telling everyone what you saw. People will think you're crazy. I know, Emma said, her voice steady, but we'll figure it out. We'll make them see. And with those words, Emma knew that there was no turning back. The path ahead was uncertain, the obstacles daunting, but she had a responsibility now. She had seen the truth, and it was up to her to make sure the world knew before it was too late. Emma's resolve grew with each passing day. She could feel the weight of the prophecy, the vision she had seen, pushing her forward, urging her to act. Every conversation with Sarah, every moment spent trying to piece together how to warn the world, felt like a step toward an inevitable confrontation. There was no more running from it. She had seen the future, and now it was her duty to make sure people listened. But how could she possibly reach them? How could she make them believe the terrifying truth she held inside her? The days in the hospital were growing longer. She had been discharged, but the world outside seemed unfamiliar to her now. Nothing felt the same. She had returned to life, but it was a life tainted by the knowledge of what was coming. The world had shifted, and she was no longer a part of it in the same way. Her thoughts were consumed by the vision, by the images of suffering and destruction. No one else could see it. No one else seemed to feel the urgency that clawed at her chest. She spent her days researching, looking for anything that might validate her vision. She scoured the news, looking for signs, for clues that the world was indeed heading toward collapse. But every headline she read seemed mundane. The world was continuing as it always had: wars, political struggles, social unrest. The kind of things people had seen for centuries. Nothing felt out of the ordinary. But deep down, Emma knew better. She had seen it, the world's inevitable descent into chaos. And if no one listened, no one acted, it would be too late. It was late one evening when she sat down at her computer, her fingers moving across the keys in a feverish attempt to find something, anything, that would prove she wasn't crazy. Her mind was racing, the weight of everything pressing down on her, making it harder to breathe, harder to focus. She had to find a way. There had to be someone out there who would listen. Her eyes flickered to the screen as her fingers typed in search terms. Anything related to the future, the end of the world, prophecies, signs of disaster. She was starting to lose hope when her search led her to a website, a small, obscure page that seemed out of place on the internet. It was dedicated to various prophecies, predictions, and unexplained events. At first glance, it didn't seem like much. But as she read through it, one particular article caught her eye. The title read, "The End Times, What's Coming for Humanity?" Her heart skipped a beat. This was it. She had found something that could finally give her the answers she was looking for. She clicked the article and began to read. The words on the screen seemed to bleed together as her mind rushed to make sense of them. The article spoke of an ancient prophecy, one that claimed the end of the world would come not with a single, catastrophic event, but through a slow unraveling, a loss of humanity's core values, a fall into greed, hatred, and environmental destruction. Emma's breath caught in her throat. This was exactly what she had seen. The prophecy detailed the very things she had witnessed: the wars, the plagues, the suffering. It described a world that had grown so consumed by its own mistakes that it would eventually tear itself apart. It wasn't a dramatic event that would bring about the end, but a slow, agonizing decline. And Emma realized with a sickening jolt that the prophecy wasn't just a story, it was a warning, a glimpse into the future. Her hands shook as she read more, the words on the screen becoming clearer, more detailed. The prophecy spoke of a group, a select few, who would rise to challenge the world's descent into chaos. These individuals who would be chosen would have the knowledge and power to awaken humanity to the dangers of their ways. They would have to face great resistance, but their actions would ultimately determine whether the world would be saved or destroyed. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't just a passive observer anymore. She was part of this prophecy. She had been chosen to carry this message, to be one of the few who could stop what was coming. She felt a rush of determination surge through her, but it was quickly followed by a wave of fear. She had the knowledge. She had the warning. But did she have the strength to fight? Would anyone believe her? How could she possibly lead this charge when even the closest people in her life couldn't understand? She sat back in her chair, her mind racing, her heart still pounding in her chest. The room felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were closing in on her. Her thoughts spiraled, trying to make sense of everything she had just read. The weight of it all was too much. The knowledge that she was not only a witness but a central figure in this story was overwhelming. She was part of something much larger than herself. A soft knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. Sarah stepped inside, her eyes still filled with worry, though they now held a new understanding. She had been worried about Emma, worried about the toll the visions and the feelings of impending doom had taken on her. But now, there was something different in her eyes. Maybe it was the way Emma had spoken earlier, the desperation that had filtered into her voice, or maybe Sarah had seen the change in Emma herself. Either way, she was here. "How are you doing?" Sarah asked gently, walking toward her. "You've been cooped up in here all day. I thought maybe we could get some fresh air, go for a walk. Clear your head." Emma glanced up at Sarah, her expression distant. She had been so consumed by the weight of what she had learned that she hadn't even realized how long it had been since she had left the house. She needed a break. She needed to get out of her head, if only for a moment. Maybe the walk would help clear her thoughts, give her a moment to breathe before she dove back into the impossible task that lay ahead. "Yeah," Emma said quietly, standing up slowly. "A walk sounds good." As they left the house, Emma tried to push the fear and anxiety out of her mind. She had a job to do. She had a message to share. And now, with the prophecy in front of her, she knew the time to act was quickly approaching. But the world wasn't ready for it, and that terrified her. No one was ready for what was coming, and even if she had the message, could she truly make a difference? Could she stop the inevitable? The road ahead was uncertain, but she was determined to try. Emma could no longer deny what she had seen. Now, it was time to face the consequences. The next few days were a blur of confusion, disbelief, and determination. Emma couldn't escape the weight of the truth that she carried. She had seen the end, and there was no going back. The vision was clear in her mind, its details etched into her soul. But as she tried to piece together the future that she had glimpsed, she realized that the hardest part wasn't accepting what was coming. It was trying to get others to believe her. No one had taken her seriously. She had tried to talk to friends, family, even strangers, but they all dismissed her. They told her it was trauma, the result of the accident. They told her she was confused, that she needed time to heal. But Emma knew better. She could feel the tension building in the world, feel the echoes of destruction in every corner. She could see the path humanity was on, and it was leading to ruin. And so, she had turned to the only place where she could seek help, those who had the power to make a difference. She had spent days researching, looking for anyone who might listen, anyone who could understand the severity of the situation. That was when she found him. It wasn't much of a lead at first, just a name. But something about it stuck with her. Dr. James Hawthorne, a renowned figure in the field of global environmental studies. He had made waves in the scientific community with his warnings about climate change, global unrest, and the dangers of human overreach. Emma felt a strange connection to him, as though his work somehow resonated with the vision she had experienced. She had to talk to him. She had to try. A week later, Emma stood outside his office, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent days writing and rewriting her message to him, explaining what she had seen, but even now, she wasn't sure what to expect. She felt both terrified and hopeful. She had never met Dr. Hawthorne, but he had been a beacon of truth in a world that seemed to be losing its way. If anyone could understand, it was him. She took a deep breath and walked inside. The office was dimly lit, with shelves full of books and papers stacked in disarray. Dr. Hawthorne was sitting at his desk, flipping through a stack of reports. When she entered, he looked up, his expression neutral but curious. He was a man in his mid-40s, sharp-eyed and weary, as though the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. There was no smile, no greeting, just an unspoken understanding that this meeting would be different from all the others. "Emma Carter?" he asked, his voice deep and controlled. "Yes," she replied, swallowing her nerves. "I've been trying to get in touch with you." "I see. What can I do for you?" His tone was polite but distant, as though he'd heard countless strange requests before. Emma hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I need to tell you something," she began, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to sound calm. "Something important. Something that no one else believes." Dr. Hawthorne raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. Emma took another breath, her hands trembling as she held onto the paper she had brought with her. It was a summary of her experience, the visions, the message, the prophecy. Everything she had learned from the afterlife, everything she had seen. She handed it to him, watching as his eyes scanned the page, his face unreadable. "I know it's hard to believe," Emma continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I saw the end. I saw the collapse of the world, the destruction. People, cities, ecosystems, all gone. And it's not just some fantasy. It's real. It's coming." Dr. Hawthorne looked up from the paper, his expression unreadable. He studied her for a long moment, and for a split second, Emma thought he might laugh or dismiss her entirely. But then something unexpected happened. He leaned forward, placing the paper down on the desk, and met her eyes. "You believe this?" he asked quietly, his voice calm but serious. "Yes," Emma said, her voice steady. "I've seen it. I lived through it. And I need you to believe me. We have to do something before it's too late." Dr. Hawthorne sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk as he processed her words. The silence in the room was thick, heavy with the weight of what Emma had just said. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the anticipation building. This was it. This was her chance to make someone understand. Finally, Dr. Hawthorne spoke, his voice slow and deliberate. "I've been researching these patterns for years. The social, environmental, and political collapse of humanity. It's something I've been warning about for decades. But I've never heard of someone like you, who has seen it firsthand." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't imagining things. He understood. "But I'm afraid you're right," Dr. Hawthorne continued, his tone grave. "The signs are all there. The climate is shifting, the systems are failing, and we are running out of time. The vision you saw, it's not a fantasy. It's the truth." Emma could hardly believe her ears. Dr. Hawthorne was agreeing with her. He was acknowledging what she had seen. The weight of the realization hit her, and for the first time since her return, she felt a small sense of relief. There was someone else who knew. There was someone who understood. And maybe, just maybe, they could make a difference together. Dr. Hawthorne leaned forward again, his voice taking on a more urgent tone. "We can't wait any longer. We need to mobilize. If what you've seen is true, then we don't have much time left." Emma nodded, her heart racing. She wasn't alone anymore. They were in this together. They had to act, and they had to act fast. "You're not crazy, Emma," Dr. Hawthorne said, his voice soft but firm. "And you're not alone. We'll find a way to stop this. We'll make sure your warning reaches those who can change things." For the first time since her return, Emma felt hope. A small, fragile hope that, with Dr. Hawthorne by her side, they could turn the tide. She had seen the end, but perhaps this was the beginning of something else. the chance to change the course of humanity's fate. Emma stood at the podium, her hands shaking slightly as she addressed the crowded room. It was a moment she had dreamed of, but the weight of it still felt like 1,000 pounds pressing down on her chest. The world had finally listened. The road had been long and full of skepticism, but Emma refused to back down. She had lived through death, witnessed the horrors of what was to come, and now, she was determined to change the course of history. There were still many who doubted her, who couldn't accept the gravity of the situation, but she had seen the seeds of change taking root. Small steps had been made, and for the first time in years, there was hope. Emma's eyes flickered across the room, landing on Sarah, her best friend, who stood in the back, silently watching her. There was a sense of peace in Sarah's eyes now, an acceptance of Emma's purpose. It had taken time, but Sarah had come to understand that Emma was right. They were all part of something much bigger, something that could no longer be ignored. As Emma finished her speech, the room erupted in applause. She had done it. She had shared her warning with the world. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Emma felt the heavy burden on her chest lift. She had given humanity a chance, and that in itself was a victory.